Hello, everyone. This is Mr. Nobody, and today I'm bringing you a kind of a book review, a somewhat unconventional book review. Today, I want to review some children's audiobooks. Maybe other people didn't grow up this way, but I grew up listening to books on tape. I've always loved verbal storytelling. I was a big reader, but I loved hearing stories told. For me, there's just something magical about having someone read a story to you. And my own parents, every single night, I could hear my dad reading to my mom in bed, and they would often read the same books, actually, every single year. They would also mix in other books and other series, but they would almost always read The Lord of the Rings, The Chronicles of Narnia, C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy. They would just read those again and again and again. For years, it was just something that they did together at night. My dad, I could hear his voice because I was in the room right next to theirs. I could just hear the and so they would also read to me. And I just became a lover of listening to stories. My mom is a gigantic listener to audiobooks, and she would also buy them. She would buy back in the day, books unabridged on tape and then listen to them for a while. Then she would donate them to the library. So the library in our small town actually had some really good collections of audiobooks. And a lot of them were British books because that's just what my mother liked to read. And so much of what I was raised on was these wonderful British authors and British actors. And there's some that I've been able to look up, and they were founding members of the Royal Shakespeare Company. It just showed me what you could do with a voice, what you could bring to a performance. I can't do anything like that in my readings, but I'm inspired by these people. I love them. I love a good reader. A good reader makes so much out of a great audiobook. And a bad reader just destroys it. And sometimes even authors and professional actors can be bad readers. It is not, reading a book is not the same as being an actor in a movie. And reading a book is also not necessarily the same as writing a book, especially if you're someone who, say, isn't great at in-person communication and so became a writer to help you express yourself better. I can remember one audiobook, I feel like it was Bill Bryson or someone, and I heard it read by the author. It's just like, wow, this is so much funnier when it's not read by the author, because the author just has such a robotic voice that it drains all the life out of it. Anyway, that's what we're talking about today. Today, I'm talking about the fact that I pass that on to my own children, because for me, listening to stories at night was a big deal. And so at night, sometimes to help my children go to bed, I would put on a CD or a tape of an audiobook, and they loved them. Now, I grew up with an enormous amount of Agatha Christie and Douglas Adams and Patrick McManus, a lot of humor things, like I said, a lot of British things, some of them fairly adult for a young kid. And then, of course, lots of classics. What I want to go through is the things that I picked and I chose for my own children, and then also the things that they chose out of the stuff that I provided them with. And some of those things that were my favorites, they didn't really pick up, and that made me sad. But, your kids aren't always exactly like you. You don't always share everything. It reminds me of Patton Oswalt realizing his daughter was never going to be that excited about Star Wars. And then he realized, but she's really into My Little Pony. And actually, My Little Pony is this rich, imaginative fantasy universe, and I can get excited about that. And I remember when I heard that from him, at the time, I myself had a daughter of the same age and had been watching My Little Pony with her, and it had been my idea to watch it. And so I was having the same experience as him. And I think that's a great idea. There's a whole bunch of TV shows that my kids like, and I'm actually the one who went seeking for it. So instead of just letting them wander around, watch whatever shows or find whatever shows, you go and try and find something as a parent that you actually appreciate and you think your kids would enjoy, and that maybe you can even enjoy with them, because then you can talk about it with them and it becomes this shared bit of culture actually between you. I think it's great if parents and adults can actually enjoy some of the same stories. And a truly good children's book should be enjoyable for adults and children. As an adult, you should find new depths that are buried into it. I really think children's literature is actually some of the most brilliant and complex and difficult literature to do well. because you have to know how to put things in a way that children will pick up and love without just telling it to them. Like, it's very, very show don't tell. You can't tell them what's going on, and they're not going to analytically pick it apart. And I'll give you an example of that when I get to one of the ones that I want to talk about. Now, the first thing I want to show actually is the sort of honorable mentions. These are things that I got for my children that were just never completely embraced. And one of those, and maybe they just need to get older, was The Hobbit. This was the first Hobbit that I had. This is the Mind's Eye radio adaptation. There, of course, have been so many different adaptations of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. This is the one that I began with. This is, like I said, it's the Mind's Eye edition. And then there's also a follow-up Lord of the Rings one that goes with this one, but is harder to get a hold of. I think I have it on tape, and I have the first 2 books of it as like a digital file. So it's a dramatization, and the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, there's a continuity of voices. So the people that you get in the first one, you also get in the second one, and I really appreciate about that. And it's well done. It's silly, it's childish, but it was, according to my daughter, too scary. Not that she hasn't read some fairly scary books, but for one reason or another, it was too scary for them. They just couldn't get quite as into it. My daughter has seen the Lord of the Rings movies. She loved them completely. She even, for her birthday, wanted an Arwen Even Star necklace, which I got for her. But I still have had a hard time getting her hooked onto either the dramatizations that I think are good for children or the full-length unabridged editions, which I also have. I mean, I've got this, ever since I was a kid, my parents bought me, when I was a little kid, I was listening to the Silmarillion unabridged at night. I loved that. When I was like a 6th grader, I loved listening to the Silmarillion unabridged at night. And I didn't know hardly anyone who had read it. And I had this very old dog-eared copy of it that I just carried with me and would even bring to school with me. It ended up becoming kind of precious. I had to start taking better care of it. But I love that book. But I would 100% recommend this. You can see what your kids are like. When they get older, 100% get the unabridged readings by Rob Inglis. I know there's a lot of other versions out there. I know there's an Andy Serkis version. Just Rob Inglis. That is it. That is the definitive edition. That is one of the best audiobook reading performances I have ever seen, or heard in my entire life. It is spectacular. His ability to keep through this enormous cast of hundreds of characters and perfectly leap back into the distinct voice and way of speaking that each character has across all 3 books, plus The Hobbit, is amazing and spectacular. He wrote his own music to go with all of the songs and poems, and he sang it himself. And it's just incredible what he did. I mean, just the performance of it is a genuine work of art. So definitely get those. I'm hoping that eventually my girls can get more into it, but we'll see. Maybe it's just not meant to be. And that's okay if that's how things are. Some other personal favorites that I really like and recommend, but it kind of depends on your own kid, and it also depends, I think, also on what age you introduce them. And some of them you might be better off reading sections of yourself. The Wind in the Willows, another awesome, fantastic kid's story that I just absolutely adore. But my girls actually found it scary for some reason. Something about the adaptation, something about the rats kind of freaked them out, and they just haven't quite jumped into this one. Nevertheless, it's such a fantastic story. Same thing, A Bear Called Paddington. This has had moderate popularity, but just hasn't been as big as a hit as I would have wished that it could be. It's such a cute story. I think Paddington's adorable. My girls do love the movies. We own both of the movies, and they're wonderful adaptations. But they never quite got super on board with it. It's narrated by Stephen Fry, too. I love Stephen Fry. I recommend it entirely. See if your kids will like it. It's such a nice, fun, easy read, especially for younger kids. It's so cute. So big recommendation. But like I said, my kids didn't go all crazy for it. Same thing with Peter Pan. I'm a gigantic fan of Peter Pan. I've talked about Peter Pan in some of my Making Nobody Happy videos. I've done a reading from it. I'm a huge fan of Peter Pan. It's been adapted so many ways, so many times. My kids do enjoy multiple movie adaptations for it, but somehow they never quite got into the BBC radio adaptation. I don't blame it. The BBC does a great job. I love the BBC children's classics and the BBC radio adaptations, especially some of the older ones. And especially if you can find some of those older ones, they're wonderful. Even if you're just an adult and you want to entertain yourself, go dig up online. You can listen to things like some of the David Suchet, Hercule Poirot stories, the Rumpole of the Bailey stories. They're fun, they're funny, they're clever, performed by wonderful British actors who are just a joy to listen to. And I still find those as delightful as when I was a kid. And then here's some others that I would put in kind of the mid-tier. Uncle Wiggly. So Uncle Wiggly was a newspaper column story that ran for years and years and years. I mean, was written, this guy wrote like thousands of these. I mean, literally like thousands of these stories. And my dad remembers reading them as a kid, and I just happened to run across it. And so I picked it up. It wasn't this one. It was, I didn't bring it out. I think it's called, This is Uncle Wiggly and Little Tales. The one that I first got was, I think, The Adventures of Uncle Wiggly. And my younger daughter, who loves animals, just loved that one. They're just very cute, silly little stories, kind of like Rudyard Kipling, but even kind of smaller and sillier. If your kid is someone who likes like Peter Rabbit, those sort of stories, Uncle Wiggly is a great fit. So yeah, if you have a kid who loves animals and stories about animals and them being silly and having silly, just light-hearted stories, nothing crazy happens in them. Who likes the sort of, Benjamin Bunny, Peter Rabbit sort of world. This is the sort of thing they would like. And then Magic Treehouse. We've got a humongous amount of these. My daughters really enjoy them. Very light, very nice. I'm not quite as like, ooh, huzzah, but they're good. They're read by the author who does a good job. They're nice, consistent stories, and there's a lot of them. So that this one thing alone contains 8 different stories. So you get a lot of bang for your buck from these. So there's a reason why this is a New York Times #1 best-selling series, and I'm sure at your kid's school it'll come up. So now I want to get into some of the real heavy hitters. These are the ones that it's like captivated my children. These are the prizes. These are the ones that have gotten listened to again and again and again and again. And the first thing I want to start out with is James Herriot. Now, this has been adapted for TV also. It's a series of books by a vet. He was Scottish. He lived in Yorkshire. And he lived an interesting time, too, during the transition time from when horses were still a major factor on farms and before the advent of penicillin. And then it's during his career, you see that transition of all of a sudden you have this whole new class of drugs come in that lets him do things they could never do before. And you start seeing his practice transition from large animal, working animals, to more of a small animal, pet animal practice. And his own kids go on to become vets. There's a current series on TV. They've made, I think, 1 season of it, maybe 2. I can't remember. I feel like I know I watched 1, but did I watch the second one? I might have. Anyway, the new adaptation of it is really good. The old adaptation with Christopher Timothy is really good. And when I was a kid, I had tons of the James Herriots, including ones read by the author, which are fun because he still has this kind of rolling Scottish accent. Whereas in most of the adaptations, sometimes someone you go Scottish accent. Christopher Timothy doesn't have that, who did the old TV show. He was British. But this is a great way to enter your children into it. This is also a book. I actually, when my kids were little, I had this. It was a picture book, and I would read the stories with the pictures to my children. And then when they got a little older, I got this, and it's got a couple CDs in here, and it just has nice selections of stories for kids. Because a lot of them are wonderful stories for kids. I would say all of his stories are wonderful for kids, but of course, some of them are cuter than others. Some of them are, there are some tragic ones too. There's a lot of variety in there too. So this is fantastic. This was one of the first things that actually sold my children on the idea of listening to audiobooks. And once we had that, we made the leap to this. And you can get this. This is an incredible value. We've got All Creatures Great and Small, All Things Wise and Wonderful, All Things Bright and Beautiful. So the three most well-known James Herriot books. It doesn't have some of the others like Vet in Harness, Let Sleeping Vets Lie. Those are some, I think, the earlier books. These sort of form the core of it, but this is an enormous number of CDs, tons of stories. You learn so much about England, about the period, about farms, about history, about animals. Like, your children are going to get an entire education out of this, an exposure to a different side of life, and the struggles and that living close to the earth and growing your food and the ups and downs of pet ownership or cow and horse and sheep ownership. And it's wonderful and introduces you to so many things that you might otherwise miss. And I especially appreciate the new adaptation that they're doing for not shying away of some of those things, like how do you take a cow's temperature? It isn't in their mouth. And when you need to check to see what's happening inside of a sheep during preparing for delivery, how do you do that? Well, it's not with some sort of scanning machine. You're out in a barnyard. You do things the old-fashioned way, and it's dirty and it's painful and it's often humiliating. That's one of the things I appreciate about it. James Herriot does not spare you from having to hear about all the things he had to go through as a vet, and they're very entertaining, and sometimes they're hilarious. And you also feel sympathy for him. You're just like, oh, I wish he could just get clean and get somewhere warm and dry. But this is an incredible collection, excellent value. I don't remember exactly how many discs. It's 44 hours, 35 CDs. That's incredible. Such a huge value. This is a top pick for me. Even as an adult, I would have just bought this for myself. They're such incredible stories. My kids have had so much fun listening to that. And they got through, all those discs, they've listened to them more than once, several times. So let's get into some of my other favorites. Another one that's been incredibly popular in our house, The Boxcar Children. It's The Boxcar Children. I have read these books out loud to my girls. They have a ton of these. This is the first one, which comes as its own little standalone thing, but the rest come in collections where you get 3 stories, 3 books per thing, and a lot of them are framed as mysteries. They're mysteries in a mild way. It's more of it's not a mystery like who killed this person. It's more like what happened here, or what happened to this story? Why is this house here? Why does this person live alone? Why did no one ever come back for this? They're little human mysteries. They're very nice stories. And it all began with this, The Boxcar Children. My older daughter just ate this story up the same way that I did when I was a kid. It's such a wonderful fantasy of kids living alone, making a house for themselves out in the woods in a boxcar. And there's tons of these stories, which are all very nice. But if you get any of them, definitely get this one. This is one of the most listened to things in my house. My girls just never got tired of it. It's a wonderful story. Definitely try to get the unabridged version. They're not long books. There's no reason for them not to be unabridged. And they're just delightful. They're sweet. They're nice. The kids have fun little personalities. So get The Boxcar Children. I shouldn't have to really tell anyone that. Okay, the Ramona series, another gigantic hit with my girls. I didn't even anticipate how much of a hit because, I heard of Ramona, but I did not grow up with this. This is, I missed this. But I do not even know how many of these we have. I feel like we have 10 of these because there's a bunch of them as they follow the girls, particularly Ramona. And her sister, and they're all, Ramona the Pest, Ramona and Beezus, that's her sister, Ramona her father, Ramona and Henry. And you can basically, I bought them to follow along with my girls. So once they reached like the age of Ramona, when Ramona's like in preschool, it's like, all right, we're going to get the preschool one of Ramona. You'll listen to it while she's in preschool. It's like, okay, next year, now she's in kindergarten. Now she's in first grade. We'll get the kindergarten one. We'll get the first grade one. It's great to follow along. Wonderful characters, wonderful interactions between the people. These are just some of my girls' favorites. My younger daughter, who is not the one I expected, has been incredibly faithful about enjoying listening to these at night, and I never would have guessed that she would be that into them. But especially the younger ones, I think she just finds they're fun. They're written by someone who truly understands the way children think and the way children feel, because you have these tiny little things that to an adult are nothings, but to the kids, they're the biggest things in the world. Big fights, big struggles, big disappointments. Ramona gets offended and unhappy by something that happens in school. She gets in trouble for something that she completely deserved to get in trouble for, but she wants her teacher to love her so much that it becomes this gigantic crisis and the end of her whole world. And it's that kind of perspective into the way that children actually see and think about their own worlds is why I think these are fantastic books. I think even as an adult, it's actually good to read or listen to them because it takes you back into your own child's world and lets you be like, oh yeah, this is how things seem to them. To me, it's just like, yeah, that's stupid. That doesn't matter. Why are you a kid? Why are you being so silly? And this helps you remember what it's actually like and how you feel, how your children feel, how they think at that time in their life. So yeah, every single one of these I've gotten has been a hit, but definitely this has probably been one of the ones that's been listened to the most. This one, and like I think the next one. Now I've done a reading of this, the Justo Stories. This actually may have been the very first thing that I gave to my daughter to listen to. Because it's written like you're just being told a story by your dad, because that's what these were. It was a dad's stories to his daughter. And so I was just thinking, well, what could be better? What could be more fun? What could be more easy? And so I've got this. This is a Jim Weiss edition. I've always thought Jim Weiss is a slightly odd reader, but he's a good reader, and I really admire his ambition. He set himself a goal to just like make audio recordings of all of his favorite books, and I don't know how many he's done or how long he spent doing it, but he has really put in the time and the effort to record great books. And he's also the one who recorded Uncle Wiggly. And so huge credit to him for preserving children's literature in spoken form. And I really appreciate him for that. He's actually won, as you can see on the back here, he's won all sorts of awards for his voice work. And this is just it. This is, like I said, this is what got my children into listening to stories at night apart from what I read to them or do to them, something they can listen to on their own, something to comfort them if they wake up, so it doesn't always have to be their dad coming into the middle of the night. It's, of course, it's not absolutely all the stories. It's 7 of the stories, this version, that he picked, but these are kind of the classic ones. So total winner, Rudyard Kipling. I mean, you can also go on YouTube and find readings by people, including, like I said, by some of the foundings of the Royal Shakespeare Company, reading other Rudyard Kipling stories, and they're just incredible, the life that they bring to them, because these are stories that just beg for a great dramatic reader. They're just asking to be read by someone who can bring them to life. They're written in such a rich performative way. You can tell they're meant to be spoken. So huge hit, definitely get that. And then Winnie the Pooh. It's Winnie the Pooh. I shouldn't have to explain this. This is Winnie the Pooh. There's a reason why these are so popular. There's many different adaptations of it. I have many adaptations of it. I have unabridged readings of it. This one is really fun and really approachable. This is a kind of a dramatization in that it does have a bunch of famous British actors reading certain characters. So Pooh is Stephen Fry. He's incredible. Jane Horrocks is Piglet. I love hearing her. I've been listening to her for a long time. Jeffrey Palmer, Judi Dench. I mean, these are the people you want to be listening to. These are great readers of BBC audio dramas. So definitely, if you get a chance, try to pick up this version. of Winnie the Pooh. It's not very expensive. It's 2 discs. It's got all the classic stories. This, especially for younger kids, but even my older daughter, even though she's kind of moved on to older stuff, she can still enjoy this. Winnie the Pooh is just fun. They're nice stories. They're delightful. And then we're moving to slightly older, but you'd be surprised how young a child can actually start to enjoy these. The Little House on the Prairie series. Now, these are amazing books. I love these books. I have all of them unabridged on audio. I also have the books. We have also watched the TV series. And I will also just say, on a side note about the TV series, that's one of the most well-made and well-written TV series I've ever seen. Each episode of that TV show has more acting effort and thought and writing put into it than the majority of movies you will see these days. If I had any criticism of it, that's actually that often each episode is like watching a movie, and it can be, for me, almost tiring because they often are so complex and high emotional stakes, and they make you cry, and so much happens in them, and it's like, I thought I was just sitting down to watch a nice little TV show, but instead I got this extremely, thoughtful and heart-wrenching story about alcoholism or learning to forgive the wrongs of the past or the struggles of crippling loneliness, all sorts of things. Some of them are really fun and really funny. Some of them are zany and silly. The performers are all fantastic. I love the intro because you see the littlest girl running down the hill, looking real cute, running through flowers. She just trips and falls flat on her face. That was not scripted. That just happened. And that's what I like about it. Such tangibility, wonderful connection to American history, to the things the pioneers went through. This whole series, this is a 10 out of 10. Like everyone should read Little House on the Prairie. It's incredible. And for me, it's not just fun. Like, you learn from it. It teaches you. It's inspiring. They're great stories. I remember listening to this one in the car with my girls for the first time, and they crossed the river, and it turns out Pa sort of underestimated the river, and their dog gets washed away in the river. And then when they think he's gone, and that was so scary and heartbreaking for my children, and then the dog shows back up, and they were so delighted. So just an incredible series. I mean, I can't emphasize that enough. That should definitely be in every parent's shelf. And also, the read versions are great. These adaptations, they're wonderful. They're incredibly well done. Performed by Cherry Jones, Tony Award winner. She's a great reader. She's an example of an actress who, usually people in England, if you're a famous actor, you have that theatrical skill that also makes you a wonderful reader. In America, that's just not necessarily true. But we do have people, especially some great character actors, and those people can be great readers. Now I want to turn to another classic. I already owned this. I did not have to buy this for my children. And that is, of course, the Chronicles of Narnia. I mean, I grew up on this. I listened to this a million times, a bunch of different adaptations. I've got versions of this on tape. I had versions of this read by old British dudes doing all the voices on their own. These are wonderful because they're unabridged. They've got some of the classic Pauline Baines art in it. You get all of it together. It's 31 hours. They're also just a work of art. They're beautiful. I love that they included the images because the images are such an iconic part of those books too, and their history. And their choice of readers is great. Kenneth Branagh and Michael York up in there. I grew up listening to Michael York do, British readings of things. And of course, Kenneth Branagh, if you don't know who Kenneth Branagh is, he's done. I feel like I can't explain Kenneth Branagh. You should know who he is. He's incredible. Alex Jennings, another Royal Shakespeare guy. He does a great job. Lynn Redgrave, she did an incredible job in there. I was really impressed by her. And Oh yes, then Patrick Stewart. Patrick Stewart, perfect choice too for. I believe he does the Last Battle. He's a great choice for Last Battle, which is a very dramatic one. You want someone who's a little more dramatic. Derek Jacoby. Oh, I love Derek Jacoby. His voice is so warm, so cozy. It's like a blanket you can curl up inside. And I've enjoyed, of course, all of his work as Brother Cadfael. Um, and then Jeremy Northam. I mean, as I said, all of the readers, every single one of the readers they picked for this series is just a huge win. This is the definitive abridged version of this. This is the one you should get. Again, this is another one. Everyone should own this. I don't care if you have kids or don't have kids. You should own this. This is one of the quintessential great audiobooks that you can get. Right up there with, like I said, the Rob Inglis, Lord of the Rings. And then the last one that I want to talk about, which I got because when I was a kid, my parents were always really into mythology. And I know nowadays that's more common because we had things like Percy Jackson. And Percy Jackson happened because the author grew up on books like this, probably this book. There are other adaptations, of course, but D'Aulaire's Book of Greek Myths, which is a wonderful picture book. If you can, definitely also get the picture book because the pictures are amazing. Even how they made the pictures are amazing. They put them on these like stones, each of which weighs like 250 pounds. And then each is used to print one color, and then you put them all together and it makes the image. And it's a husband and wife, Ingrid and Edgar Perrin d'Aulaire, and they adapted a lot of stuff. They also did Norse myths, and I have to say we got the Book of Norse Myths. My daughter loves the Book of Norse Myths. The Book of Trolls, that's another fun one. We've got that one. They have a bunch of historical ones too, biographies and picture books, lots of things. But this is like the big heavy hitter. This is their version of the Greek myths. My daughter has listened to this so many times. I have no idea how many times she's listened to it. And they were doing a Greek mythology section at school, and she just knew everything. She knew more than anybody. She knew all these stories by heart. She loved them. And they're such interesting stories. All the different mythologies have their own quirks. One of the things I really like about Greek mythology, it is so deeply tied into our culture. So much of our cultural and our references and our books and things are actually built on this, that it's really helpful to just know them and understand them, because in some way they sit at the back of and behind an enormous part of the furniture that makes up our minds. And especially so many references in classical literature depend on having some familiarity with these stories. But also these stories really capture a lot of they were very good at capturing life and the world and the different aspects of society and of people and their follies and their struggles, their jealousies, their hatreds, their ambitions, their fears. The Greek mythology is so psychological. It's like, you can see why people like Jung and Camille Paglia and people like that have looked at it so much and said, what they have done is they have taken their philosophical and psychological understanding of humanity. They've taken their knowledge of the whole world and they basically put it into stories that you can just tell to people verbally and just remember. And you have knowledge and wisdom in there, but everything's basically put into a story form with characters, and symbolized wonderfully. You get all these great archetypes. And they're just very interesting. So I would also say this, or the written version of it is, but actually this audiobook is so approachable. This is the 4 compact disc version, 4 hours. It's not like it's an enormous book. It's a children's book. Yes, these have been listened to so many times in our house that I can scarcely count it. And my daughter, again and again, for years and years. I mean, she's turning 11 now, and she still just loves this. And she'd had this for a long time. She wanted the actual print book so she could see the full size versions of the pictures. I also have a lamb chop Sherry Lewis 1-minute version of the Greek myths, which are pretty fun but that's on tape and hard to get a hold of. If you have really young kids and you want to expose them to the Greek myths, the Sherry Lewis versions are fun because they don't necessarily pull the punches on what happens in the stories, but present them in a short, nice, fun way. And that's what I also like about this book. It's not going to childify the stories too much. It's genuinely trying to give you the stories, including the tragic endings to many of the stories and the terrible things that happen to people. And the Greeks are looking at the world and to some degree just saying, oh, this is what the world is like. Sometimes terrible, tragic, ironic, unfair things happen. Sometimes the gods are just against you. Sometimes you're just being toyed with. Sometimes these little things can bring about the ruin of an entire kingdom. And that's what makes the stories dramatic and interesting, because none of the characters are safe. And it's a big world. It's a scary world. It's a powerful world. It's a living, rich world. That's what's great about these myths. And I think that's what makes kids seize onto them. But they made them very approachable and very enjoyable to listen to. So again, this would probably, if I had to ask my own daughter what her absolute favorite audiobook was, probably this one. Anyway, those are all the top picks from our audio library. So maybe if you get a chance, go on to Amazon. That's where I got pretty much all of these. Most of them are not that expensive. It's worth the investment. I also like having physical media. I like being able to look at it. I like being able to pick it off a shelf and, to genuinely own it too. But you can get audible versions of many of these. So if you're more into the digital versions of stuff, sure, that's an easy way to do. Then you don't have to worry about as much storage. If you're someone who uses Alexa, Alexa can read most of these books to you. And a lot of them you can just buy as MP3s from Amazon instead of in the CD version. I just happen to personally be partial to the CD version. I find a much easier way to look at bedtime and say, what should we listen to? Because when I'm getting the lights turned down and I'm tucking my girls in, I don't necessarily want to talk to Alexa and say, Alexa, tell me what are the names of all the children's audiobooks I own. Not that you can't memorize them. But anyway, that's all for today. I'll see you next time.